The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the game that arguably saved Nintendo and single-handedly justified the Nintendo Switch. Seriously, there was nothing else to play at launch and people still ate it up. Now, I didn't play Breath of the Wild when it first came out, I only got a Switch when Mario Odyssey released. But when I got the game, man, my time with it was incredible. Or was it? You see, today we're looking at Breath of the Wild through a different lens than it's usually looked through. These are my critique glasses. Hope you can see them, because I can't really see anything. I'm not gonna keep wearing these. Now, where to start? Breath of the Wild is such a big game with so much to do. For the full review, it will take about 3 hours to get through everything. Luckily, we're not here to do that. I'm just complaining about one of my favourite games of all time. But it's also something to mention, while this is a critical review, I absolutely adore this game through and through. I'm not doing this to hate on Breath of the Wild because, as I said, I love it. I'm doing this to make sure these issues are fixed in the sequel, and yes, I know the chance of Nintendo watching this to do anything other than copyright claim this video is basically null, but we can all hope the critiques of a funny internet meme man can get appreciated. Let's begin at the beginning of the game, the prologue / Great Plateau. This is a great way of introducing the player to all the game's mechanics in a decently safe environment and nudging players into the right direction. Although when revisiting or replaying the game, this area being required isn't the best thing. But just allowing this part to be skipped wouldn't work, as too many players would skip it on their first playthrough, thinking it was just a tutorial. There could be the possibility of being able to go to the old man on top of the Tower of the Temple of Time at any point to get the Paraglider. You could immediately skip the plateau, but at the cost of the 4 Spirit Orbs. There's of course a chance a new player would stumble into this, and of course the runes would be a big question mark, and we don't even know if the intro of the second game would even be handled remotely like this. There's also the shrines, and I'm not sure I like the way they're implemented now. The sheer amount of them is odd, seen as some of them are way too short in my opinion. They all follow Nintendo's traditional design philosophy of introducing a mechanic and then building on top of it, but these mechanics don't get to shine because the shrines are too short to properly evolve the mechanic in them. What's even weirder is that there are multiple shrines that use the same mechanic. Take for example the wind gimmick. There are a couple of shrines where you glide over these fans with the paraglider. Sure, they aren't identical, in one you glide horizontally and in another vertically, but they could be combined with ease, of course with some changes to keep the natural difficulty evolution. So I would suggest either having a different system to get more hearts and stamina, or in the case Nintendo would want to keep the shrine system in place, I suggest that the shrine count gets cut in 4 to make for a total of 30, but individual shrines get about 4 times longer. The big issue with this is that then the shrines would be about as long as the Divine Beasts, or even longer in some instances. In this case, the Divine Beasts would also need to be lengthened to accommodate. I personally think that the Divine Beasts are long enough as they are, so that's where we come to another issue, the Divine Beasts themselves. When I first started with Ruta, I loved the aspect of moving parts of the Divine Beasts around, but I feel these were so underused. With Ruta specifically, it's used to spray water over certain areas, though you only need to do this for one of the 5 terminals, and yes, there is another one where you need to move it around, but the water doesn't have an influence on that one. I feel they thought it would be a cool idea to change things about the Divine Beast on the map, and had 1 or 2 ideas relating to it, but then couldn't think of much more after they had implemented the system to do so. However, that's purely speculation, and to be honest, the other puzzles in the Divine Beast make up for the lack of use of this one specific feature. And I don't really have anything to complain about with the bosses of the Divine Beast. They're stylistically very similar, a bit one-dimensional, but these are some decently fun bosses. Taking a quick detour, I wanted to talk about the game's music. On one side, I feel this game has one of the best soundtracks in the series. On the other hand, I feel this game lacks in full music tracks. When you're just out and about in Hyrule, there's not any music tracks to keep you company like in previous games. This does one thing really well: immerse you even further into this world. You can really get the impression that Hyrule is in shambles and you need to save it ASAP. But it also strips the game of a lot of the previous games' charm. Sure, the music and its charm is still here in full force, but only in specific areas, villages, towns and labs being most common. I'm not saying there isn't any quality music in the game, but I feel the field music could have been much better had they gone a different route with it. I think a Breath of the Wild style game with field music somewhat like Donkey Kong Country's underwater theme would be absolutely amazing. It would have more to it than the current few notes, but it also wouldn't get rid of that ambience of the ruined Hyrule. Though I get that this is also a very different style than what Zelda usually goes for. When we're in the fields, we can also have a look at the combat system. Now, I have a lot to say about this, as I never ended up using part of it in my first playthrough. The shield and lock-on system should be updated. For this one, I don't have an immediate fix, as this is more of a game feel thing. Yes, it's true, I never locked onto any enemies, as I didn't need it that much. Not the entirety of the game, as the game actually requires you to do it sometimes, but overall, every shield in my inventory was brand new. They were just fashion accessories to me. And yes, this means I've not properly used Daruk's protection until now. I thought it'd be funny if I did a joke about losing my integrity, but then I realized I already did that one. I never have trouble hitting an enemy unless it's specifically intended to use the lock-on system. Yes, in Ocarina of Time on the N64, that might be a different story. That game introduced it because it was necessary, but this game lock-on-less combat is fine, a little one-dimensional if anything, but definitely fine. And it's not as if the game never told me it exists either. There's a whole shrine dedicated to teaching you. I just never needed it in the moment I was fighting. Of course, you need it in the final boss, so I needed to teach myself to use it to beat him. Since then, I've used it, but never really felt I needed to. The issue is, I never saw anyone else complain about it, or even have the slightest problem with it. It could be this was my first Zelda game, I was stupid syndrome, but I can't be the only one who has this issue, right? The first fix I can come up with is to have the lock-on button and shield button separately instead of having both on L. I'm not sure this would work, but it's an idea at least. And I think I would at least use the shields more. There's also another part of the combat I think is implemented imperfectly: the weapon durability system. The reason for weapons breaking is obvious. If they didn't, the fields and other easier areas would be a cakewalk. However, weapons break way too quickly in my opinion. After every Divine Beast, you get a weapon that belongs to that beast's champion, and I never used any of them because I was too afraid to break them. I think I would have used them more alongside the other emergency weapons in my inventory if they didn't break that quickly. Now, this issue was largely fixed when getting the Master Sword, although it does lose its power after a while and needs to recharge. I propose two fixes for this. A. Make the weapon durability higher while having less of them, or 2. Give the player an unbreakable weapon that deals a lower amount of damage. The former is a slight improvement, but the core issue would still remain. For example, doubling the durability of weapons while having them appear half as much. There would still be situations where the player would come to an encounter without any weapons and having to resort to bombs for damage. While bombs work, the latter option I proposed is much better than them. Bombs do damage but aren't really a stand-in for normal weapons. That's why I think a base weapon that doesn't break would just be lovely. Though there is a definite upgrade path that Link goes through, and a weapon that would be overpowered in the early game would be underpowered by the time the end game rolls around. And having a base damage output would have the same issue as bombs, in that by the end of the game they aren't any good anymore. To combat this, I think this base weapon should upgrade throughout the game. I don't think a level system would suit a Breath of the Wild style game though. Or Ubisoft proves me wrong. I think that the weapons should be integrated with the enemy level system. You see, I watched a video once about how the enemies in Breath of the Wild upgrade to their different versions, and there are many variables in this. However, having your base weapon integrate in this means that that weapon is never underpowered, but also never overpowered. Also, give the other weapons a visible durability meter. Thanks. There's also the cooking system. I don't have a problem with the cooking system itself, it adds a layer of depth to the game. What food will I cook? What food will I have with me during battle? What can I combine to give me this status effect? But the flaw here is in the fact that if you have a lot of food stockpiled, you can pause the game at any moment to heal. There should at least be a limit or something. I recommend having the gameplay not stop when you press the pause/inventory button. Aside from making sure you can't instantly heal, it also makes sure that when the player saves, he or she will be in a safe space. And now we make it to the most dreadful part of a completionist playthrough, the Koroks. They're weird. There are a total of 900 Korok seeds, but you don't need all of them to get all of the inventory upgrades.
Wait, what? All of this for nothing?
You only need 441 for all the upgrades, less than a half. You do get Hestu's gift for getting all of them, but it serves no purpose at all. It's likely that Nintendo didn't want people like me, who complete games but don't go overboard, don't try and go for all of them, but simultaneously, the completionists out there get a piece of poo for getting all the 900 Koroks. That's not really a reward, is it? The thing is, by this point your save file is done and giving the player infinite weapon slots would be useless, though I think giving the player an item for completing the game 100% isn't really the way to do it. This is where an achievement system would be really cool. I think an achievement system would add so much replay value to the game by giving you little things to do and rewards for them. At the moment there is a system somewhat like this in the game, the side quests, but I'm proposing system-wide achievements. Yes, we're getting dangerously close to criticizing the Switch now, but this is something I've wanted from Nintendo since the 3DS. I love getting little points, even if they don't mean much. They could possibly have this connect with My Nintendo and give you silver points that you now get for achievements for their mobile games. While we're on the topic of systems, Breath of the Wild also released on Wii U. Heck, it was even supposed to be the main version. In pre-release footage of the game, before the Switch was even known as the NX, the map was shown to be on the gamepad. The final game, however, doesn't have this feature. Well, it's normal that stuff gets scrapped or changed during development. This is such a good feature, why did they remove it? Well, I and a couple of other people have a bit of a theory. I think the old people in suits over at Nintendo, the same ones that cancelled the Smash Melee tournament mind you, probably asked them to remove it to make sure the Switch version didn't seem inferior to the Wii U version, even though the Switch is portable and that's a big enough selling point on itself. While this isn't really a topic for the sequel, as I very much doubt it'll release on Wii U, it's still a thing to mention and a reminder of how evil corporate Nintendo is. Ended on a bit of a sour note there, didn't I? But this is supposed to be a critique, so that makes sense. While Breath of the Wild is still my favourite Zelda game, and probably favourite game of all time, with this video I wanted to highlight that it isn't perfect and it has its shortcomings. We can only hope the sequel improves on all these points and becomes the best game of all time. And doesn't have a limited release schedule. Seriously, Nintendo, why? Thanks for watching to the end. I hear rumours that if you like and subscribe, you'll get a cookie. I don't know about you, but I'm doing it right away.